Chapter 2, Written in the Rock. Did you know that the history of life on Earth can be found in several rocks? Paleontologists will work hard and make several sacrifices to find fossils to put together the historical evidence like Paul Sereno. For example, Paul Sereno and his colleagues had to go through political trouble, banded and suffered from diseases to find the story of dinosaur evolution. Without fossils, we will not have a clear understanding of evolution. For instance, we will know that mammals are closely related to reptiles than amphibians, but we will not know what their common ancestor would look like. Thanks to all the advanced science like biology, geology, and physics, and all these dedicated scientists, because now we have the insight to the past. Fossils have been known since ancient times, but it was not appreciated until later when they know that fossils carry history. Have you ever wondered what it takes to become a fossil? Well, there are several steps to become a fossil, which include 1. Animal or plant have to die. 2. They must find their way into water and sink to the bottom. 3. Get covered by sediment so they will not decay or get scattered by scavengers. Once they are finally buried, only the hard part of the fossil becomes infiltrated or replaced by dissolved mineral. Last, they have to be discovered. It is rare to find a land-dwelling creature on the bottom of the ocean, which is why most fossils are considered to be marine organisms. Because only the hard part gets fossilized and not the soft part, such as worms, jellyfishes, and bacteria, it makes it questionable about the ancient species. Over 80% of life species were considered to be soft bodies. It takes a while for fossils to be discovered because numerous fossils are located beneath the Earth's surface. It can only be found when they are exposed by erosion of wind or rain. Because only the hard part of the body can become fossilized and not all the fossils are found, the fossil records are considered to be incomplete. About 250,000 fossil species were found, and there were between 17 million and 4 billion fossil species that live on Earth. Did you know that the fossil record was put in order by geologists who accepted the account of life given in the book called the Genesis? The order of different layers of rock using a principle based on common sense. Since some fossils were found in sedimentary rock, the youngest rock was on top, while the oldest rock was on the bottom. To complete the rock order layer, they have to cross-correlate the strata from different locations around the world. The order of strata, was based on age or location, is known as principle of superposition, which was found in the 17th century by Zeno. Using principle of superposition will tell us the relative age of rocks. Before using radioactivity, they would use the method called principle of superposition to find out the relative age of the rock until 1945. In 1945, they started using the radioactivity, which allowed geologists to find the actual age of the rock. Some isotopes are incorporated into the rock. They will decay into another element at a constant rate, which is the half-life. For example, the old rocks, such as uranium-235, would decay to lead-207, which take about 700 million years. The younger rocks, such as carbon-14, would decay to nitrogen-14, which take about 5,700 years. To find evidence for evolution in fossil record, we will have to scan the evolutionary picture that includes the entire rock strata. The early life shows that species were simple, and as time goes on, the species became more complex. Since the history of life involves splitting of species from common ancestors, they should be able to find evidence of the ancestor. For instance, in the 19th century, the anatomists predicted that mammals evolved from the reptile, so they should find a particular fossil of reptile that was becoming similar to a mammal. When Darwin was doing research, he didn't have enough fossils to show evidence of gradual change or show continuous change within the lineage of animals until paleontologists found numerous fossils that fulfilled the missing link, or also known as traditional form. When you are reading the fossil record, it is important to read it from the bottom to top. The fossil record shows that the biological and geological event that happened in 3.5 billion years ago, which was the first organism arose. For most groups, there was a gradual evolution from the earlier form. As time went on, more organisms, animals, fishes, plants, mammals, and humans arose onto the earth. For example, about 600 million years ago, the multicelled organism arose, which includes jellyfish, worms, and sponges. About 400 million years ago, the land plant and tetrapod appeared. 50 million years later, the first amphibian appeared. Another 50 million years later, the reptiles arose. The first mammals arose about 250 million years ago. Humans are considered to be a newcomer. If the entire evolution happened in a single year, the earliest bacteria will appear at the end of March, but we will not see the human ancestor until December 31st at 6 in the morning. To show gradual evolutionary change within a single lineage, you need a good succession in sediment and a marine organism such as plankton. Did you know that you can sample the layer by thrusting a long tube into the seafloor? Pull up the columnar core sample and read it from the bottom to the top. The figure on the left shows smooth gradual change over time, whereas the figure on the right shows a regular pattern. It's important to understand that not all evolution are gradual and smooth. Peter Shildon did a research on a particular organism such as the trilobite and noticed that over time, species show net increase in segment number. The change was uncorrelated and went in the opposite direction during the same period. Evolution is sometimes gradual and varied in both pace and direction.
Charles Darwin knew that within the fossil record held the answer to a great evolutionary mystery. If the theory of evolution is true, then there should be a species that is the ancestor to two different species. The ancestor that gave rise to the two different species is called the missing link. Somewhere within the strata holds fossils of missing links. Finding a single species, however, is almost impossible. We can look for close cousins to the missing link instead. This will still give us information on how the two different species came to be. Transitional forms, which are not the ancestral species, but a species showing traits from organisms that came before it and after it. Darwin and other biologists realized that there were anatomical similarities between birds and reptiles and concluded that there must have been a missing link that eventually gave rise to one lineage of birds and the other lineage of reptiles. We know that fossils of reptiles were found before birds, therefore the missing link must have been an ancient reptile. When picturing this ancestor, one begins to picture a lizard-like creature with feathers. However, the missing link will look different than all descendants from either lineage. It will only possess a few similar traits, but nothing distinct. The exact missing link does not need to be uncovered, but just a fossil that has traits that link the two groups together. "390 million years ago, the only vertebrates on Earth were fish. However, 360 million years ago, fossils of tetrapods, which are four-footed vertebrates, were discovered. Tetrapods are similar to amphibians in that they had flat heads and bodies, a neck, and developed limbs. The tetrapods also resembled early fish called lobefin fish. Lobefin fish had large bony fins that allowed them to hold themselves up in shallow water. Tetrapods also resembled these lobefin fish in that they had scales, limb bones, and head bones. If there is a transitional form between fish and amphibians, the fossils would lie in the strata between those time periods in the rock that were from freshwater sediment. One of the greatest predictions of evolution is a transitional form called Tiktaalik rosea, which was found in strata around 375 million years ago. The fossil of Tiktaalik has traits that resemble lobefin fish and tetrapods. Tiktaalik was clearly still a fish that lived in water with gills, scales, and fins. The fins had become larger and stronger, allowing it to lift its body up out of the water to check its surroundings. However, Tiktaalik had a flattened head and eyes and a nose on the top of the head instead of the side, just like an amphibian. These features were most likely adapted to allow this species the ability to peer and breathe out of water. Tiktaalik had a neck like an amphibian, which was a direct trait as fish do not have necks. Tiktaalik is an important transitional form because it has two traits which helped launch its descendants onto land. It could breathe both on land and in water because it had sturdy ribs that enabled it to pump air into its lungs as well as move oxygen from its gills. Also, the number and position of the bones in its limbs are similar to land creatures that came after it. A transitional trait was that its limbs were part leg and part fin. Tiktaalik was still only adapted for life in shallow waters. It could breathe outside of the water, but it still had gills and did not have limbs that would allow it to walk around on land. This means that somewhere in the fossil record, around 380 million years ago, there should be another creature that had no gills and sturdier limbs, allowing it to leave the water and explore land. Tiktaalik was important not only because it shows that our early ancestors were flat-headed predatory fish that lived in shallow water, but also that using the theory of evolution, we can predict where and when a transitional species would be located.
The transitional form between fish and amphibians is one of the greatest accomplishments in evolutionary biology. The name of this fossil species is called Tiktaalik. 390 million years ago, the only vertebrates were fish. If we fast forward 30 million years later, we begin to see tetrapods. Tetrapods are four-footed vertebrates that walked on land. Their characteristics were pretty interesting. They also had hard, flat heads, along with a flat body, a neck that surely made a statement, and strong, healthy legs and limb girdles. There are similarities to tetrapods and lobe-finned fishes. Tetrapods had fish structures such as scales, limbs, and head bones. Niels Shubin had spent years studying limb and fin evolution. He was so driven to comprehend the earliest stages of that evolution. The question was, where would you expect to find transitional forms? Shubin predicted that in order for transitional forms to exist, their fossils should be found in strata that is approximately 370 million years old. The rocks strictly have to come from fresh water and not in marine sediments, since lobe-finned fishes and early amphibians lived in fresh water. Shubin searched for 5 years. After the long search, him and a colleague made a discovery on Ellesmere Island. It is located in the Arctic Ocean north of Canada. When Shubin saw the stack of fossils, he knew that he had finally found his transitional form. The fossil was named Tiktaalik, which means large freshwater fish in Inuit. It was named in honor of the donor who helped fund the expeditions. The Tiktaalik has characteristics that resemble to lobe-finned fishes and amphibians, with gills, scales, and fins. The feature that really stood out were the flattened heads, like one of a salamander, along with eyes and nostrils at the top of the head. This shows that they lived in shallow water and could breathe both ways. The Tiktaalik had two very important features about them. First was their sturdy, strong lungs and ribs, which helped them pump air and move oxygen to their lungs and gills. Also, they don't have tiny bones in the fins like lobe-finned fishes. They have less sturdier bones in their limbs. The Tiktaalik were very capable of living in shallow waters due to these impressive characteristics. They range for about 150 million years ago. Their reptilian characteristics resemble reptiles, especially in their jaws that include teeth, also claws and long bony tails. After the Archaeopteryx, the discovery and the search for the next reptilian bird was dry, which left a huge space between the modern birds and their prior ancestors. But then, somewhere around the 1990s, China started to fill in the cracks, with a new fossil that looked to be of feathered theropod dinosaurs. They were found in lake sediments. They not only had bird-like features, but their actions resembled as well. After more research, they came to the conclusion that the theropods aged 135 to 110 million years ago, which means that they are not Archaeopteryx direct ancestors, but there was a possibility of them being cousins. Whales have been known to be the relatives of dolphins and are mammals. Whales came from the Artiodactys called Indohyus. Biologists said that the whale could be the longest living relative to hippos. Sharing similar characteristics, whales do, though, have a way of setting themselves apart, such as them not having rear legs, front limbs, and a flat hooktail compared to the blowhole. The Middle East plays a huge role in these particular fossil finds, and that helps biologists trace the evolution of the traits.